After the end of the world, this man is more feared than a zombie. Hello all. This is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the 3rd and 4th episodes of the 7th season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. As soon as this video gets 300 likes, I will release the next part. Enjoy watching it.
In the Savior complex, Dwight watches TV, plays air hockey with Laura and carves wooden figures. At the market, he makes his way to the bread queue and grabs a whole loaf. He watches as the rescuers beat up a red-haired man who got into an argument with a worker. After the man was beaten to death, Dwight raided his living quarters, took a jar of mustard, another jar of cucumbers, and his pregnant wife and son watched what was happening. Dwight takes tomatoes from the garden and eggs from the chicken coop. Dwight, Gordon, and the workers kneel as Negan walks by. He makes himself an egg and salad sandwich using looted ingredients and eats it outside looking somewhat satisfied. He watches as 2 workers harness a walker and chain him to the walker-encrusted exterior fence of the complex. Dwight spreads dog food on bread and takes the sandwich to Daryl, who is lying naked in a dark cell, and Daryl eats it, and he closes the door. Daryl is lying in a dark cell, and cheerful, invigorating music is playing in his ears. Dwight opens the door and gives him another sandwich, and Daryl eats it. Dwight leaves, and the sound of the door being locked is heard again. The scene repeats, only this time Dwight gives Daryl clothes. Dwight takes Daryl out of the cell and leads him to Dr. Carson's office. Dr. Carson just finished examining Sherry. She recognizes Daryl, but Dwight forbids her to talk to him. She tells Dwight that her pregnancy test is negative. Dwight looks at the test and says she can always try again. As she leaves, she advises Daryl to do whatever he is told. Dr. Carson examines Daryl's injured shoulder and assures him that Negan will take care of him. As Dwight leads Daryl back down the hallway, Negan appears and takes Dwight aside for a conversation. The Savior Fat Joey guards Daryl at gunpoint. Right in front of Daryl is an open door. Behind it he sees an apartment. Dwight pulls him away. He takes Daryl outside and shows him the fence line of the complex. They watch as 2 workers secure a new walker outside. It's a red-haired man from the market. Dwight says Daryl will be forced to work in the yard if he doesn't make the right choice. Back in the cell, Daryl tells Dwight that he will never kneel in front of Negan. "That's what I said, too," Dwight replies. He closes the door. Daryl frantically probes the walls of the cell and kicks the door. Negan tells Dwight that he works slowly, but it works. Some people are harder to break than others. He praises Dwight and offers him to sleep with one of his wives. Dwight politely refuses, which angers Negan, but then a voice is heard on the radio telling him about the escaped employee. Negan tells Dwight to send someone else to do the heavy lifting, but Dwight assures Negan that he likes it. After a while, Negan laughs and sends Dwight in search of the fugitive. Dwight leaves the camp on a motorcycle. There's music playing in Daryl's cell. Joey brings him a sandwich. He closes the door, and this time the sound of the lock is not heard. Daryl waits, then cautiously opens the door. Then he sneaks out and sneaks down the corridor. Meanwhile, Dwight rides his motorcycle through a herd of crippled walkers crawling along the highway. One walker falls from an overpass. Dwight dodges him, but he almost falls on him. He and the walker fight, but in the end the duo manages to shoot him down. Daryl walks quietly down the hall. Sherry stops him and urges him to return to the cell, otherwise he risks being captured and suffering the worst consequences. He ignores her and goes outside. He heads towards the parked motorcycles, but is stopped by a group of rescuers who foresaw his escape. Negan shows up. "We've already shit in our pants," he says. Negan asks the saviors surrounding Daryl, "Who are you?" They all answer, "Negan." He tells Daryl that he has failed his chance to prove that he is ready for the next step. Negan offers 3 options: death, work for points, or work for Negan and life as a king. Daryl doesn't say anything. Negan looks annoyed and swings Lucille at Daryl, but Daryl doesn't flinch, which impresses Negan. Negan leaves while the saviors beat up Daryl. Back on the road, Dwight spots Gordon, an escaped worker, and beats him to the ground. Sherry walks into Daryl's cell and apologizes for stealing his motorcycle and crossbow in the woods. Dwight leads Gordon back to the Savior's complex. Gordon begs Dwight to shoot him and wonders why everyone is letting Negan, one man, intimidate them into submission. He eventually agrees to return to the camp after Dwight threatens to harm his loved ones. When Gordon starts walking, Dwight shoots him. When Dwight returns to camp, he finds Sherry in the stairwell, and they smoke cigarettes together. "Does he treat you well?" Dwight asks. "Yes," Sherry answers. "We did the right thing," he tells her. "It's much better than being dead." Dwight opens Daryl's cell door and gives him food. This time he doesn't eat it, throwing a sandwich at Dwight. Dwight sticks a creepy Polaroid photo on Daryl's wall and leaves. Darry throws the photo on the floor, then picks it up, looks at it and cries at the sight of Glenn's dead body. Dwight hears him sobbing from the hallway, smiles slightly and leaves. Dwight finds Daryl and takes him to the apartment where Negan is waiting for him. Negan explains to Daryl how Dwight became one of his best people. Dwight, Sherry, and her sister Tina worked for points. When Tina fell behind on balls due to expensive medications, he asked her to marry him. Dwight, Sherry, and Tina stole the drugs and ran away. They came back after Tina died. Dwight apologized and begged Negan not to kill Sherry. Sherry offered to marry Negan if he spared Dwight's life. He agreed after cauterizing Dwight's face with an iron. Dwight hasn't hesitated since. Negan tells Daryl that he can become one of his best people and live in this apartment. "All you have to do is answer one simple question: who are you?" Negan asks this question to Daryl, and at first Daryl is silent. He asks again. After a long silence, Daryl says his name. Negan simply orders Dwight to take Daryl back to his cell. Back in Daryl's cell, Dwight yells at him for putting his own life in danger. "I understand why you did it, why you accepted it," Daryl says. "You were thinking of someone else. That's why I can't." Outside, Dwight takes a sip from a beer bottle and watches as two workers attach a new walker to the fence. This is Gordon. Michonne and Rick are lying in bed, back to back. Michonne turns and looks at Rick, who, in her opinion, is asleep, and then quietly slides out of bed, gets dressed and takes out a hidden sniper rifle from the fireplace in the living room. Rick calmly watches her leave the house with her katana and rifle. Michonne sits on top of a rusty truck in the middle of a field and looks around the neighborhood. Back at the house in Alexandria, Rick picks Judith up from her crib. Rosita and Spencer drive up to the gate, getting ready to go in search of supplies. Spencer asks Eugene if he wants to help. Eugene replies that he is repairing a portable audio system for the Saviors. Negan is staying with a large group of more than 30 Saviors, among them Daryl, who looks wounded and pale. Negan knocks on the gate and demands to be let in. Spencer opens the gate for them, not recognizing Negan at first. Rick meets Negan at the gate and notes that he came earlier than planned. Negan enters Alexandria and hands Lucille over to Rick. Rick tries to talk to Daryl, whose face is swollen and covered with bruises, but Negan forbids Rick or any of the Alexandrians to talk to him, otherwise they will face the consequences. Rick tells Negan that they have already put aside half of the supplies, but Negan says he will decide which supplies to take. Arat, one of Negan's lieutenants, orders the rescuers to start searching the houses. Dwight confiscates Rozith and Spencer's guns. He orders them to return Daryl's motorcycle. Rosita and Spencer leave Alexandria. In the field, Michonne sits patiently on a rusty truck and waits. When a walker comes into view, she points a rifle at him and shoots, missing many times. Out of frustration, she kills a walker with her katana. In Alexandria, the Saviors take out furniture from residents' homes. Negan asks about Maggie's whereabouts. Gabriel asks if Negan wants to pay his respects. "She didn't survive?" Negan asks. Lick doesn't say anything, but shakes his head hesitantly. Gabriel leads Negan to the cemetery where Glenn, Abraham, and presumably Maggie are buried. Negan regrets Maggie's death, saying that he planned to ask her to become his wife in his complex. Rick quietly seethes with anger and tightens his grip on Lucille, but quickly relaxes. A moment later they hear a shot. In the infirmary, Carl holds David the Savior at gunpoint. He orders David to return some of the medicine he took. Rick begs Carl to put the gun down. Negan pokes fun at Carl's fearlessness, and Carl finally complies after Negan threatens to harm even more people. As a precaution, Negan announces that he will confiscate all weapons in Alexandria. Olivia leads a group of Saviors to the armory. Negan tells Rick that he will leave their food untouched so that they will be strong enough to collect money for him. Negan asks if anyone keeps weapons outside the armory. Rick assures him that all the weapons are stored in a warehouse. In the woods, Rosita and Spencer find Daryl's motorcycle where they hid it before. Spencer begins to doubt Rick's leadership, unaware that Rosita is heading into the woods while Spencer loads the motorcycle into their van. Arat informs Negan that 2 pistols have disappeared from the armory. Frustrated, Negan threatens to kill Olivia if Rick doesn't find the missing guns. Rick calls a meeting of the residents of Alexandria in an attempt to find the missing guns. Ignoring questions about the missing weapon, Eric asks Rick how he plans to get them out of the situation with Negan. Rick emphasizes that there is no way out. Negan is the main one. He asks if anyone has a gun. Eugene notices that some people are absent from the meeting. Rosita tracks down the lifeless saviors who were present at Denise's death and kills them. She takes the gun from Neil's corpse, but there are no bullets in it. Spencer tracks her down and chastises her. Rosita tells him that she is looking for guns, assuming that Negan will confiscate all guns in Alexandria. She says they shouldn't live like this. While Rick, Gabriel, and Aaron search for the missing gun at Spencer's house, Rick praises Gabriel for his trick with Negan at the cemetery. Gabriel optimistically declares that they will win in the end, despite the fact that Rick insists that there is no way out. Rick then finds the missing weapon hidden in a vent under the floor of Spencer's house. He also finds some stolen groceries and a bottle of alcohol. Outside, David teases and knits on the street, strokes her face and makes a scene. The face brings Negan the missing weapon. Rosita and Spencer return when Negan gathers his group at the gate, and the rescuers begin to leave in small groups. Rick sees Michonne lurking in a dilapidated house nearby and watching them. Rick asks Negan if he can give him a second. Negan refuses, and Rick rephrases the question, "Please, can you give me a second?" Negan lets Rick talk to Michonne. Rick tells Michonne that he knows about her secret rifle and that he knew she used it for training. He convinces her to give up the rifle, claiming that more people will die if the rescuers find an Alexandrian with a gun. Rick gives Negan Michonne's rifle, inventing for her a legend that she was on the hunt. Rick then asks if Daryl can stay in Alexandria since they followed the rules and gave Negan half of their supplies. Negan asks Daryl if he wants to stay, and Daryl obediently remains silent. Dwight takes the bike from Spencer, drives up to Daryl and says, "You can take it, just say the word." Daryl is silent, and Dwight leaves. Negan refuses to leave Alexandria until Rick thanks him. "Thanks," Rick concedes. A walker approaches and Negan turns to kill him. Rick squeezes Lucille tightly again, thinking about how to kill Negan, but decides not to. Negan returns Lucille on the way out, saying he can't forget her. Despite Rick's cooperation, Negan makes fun of him to his face. The saviors leave with half of the Alexandrians' belongings and Daryl in tow. Rick closes the gate and privately reprimands Spencer for stocking up on supplies, saying that he is small, weak and that he is lucky. Spencer says they should have made a deal with Negan when they had the chance. He then blames Rick for Glenn and Abraham's deaths. Rick threatens to break Spencer's jaw and knock out his teeth if he says anything like that again. Rosita asks Spencer about the hidden guns and asks why he didn't mention them. Spencer explains that he hid the gun for a while because he didn't trust Rick and was worried that Rick would be in charge. He reflects that Rosita was right, they shouldn't live the way they live. When he leaves, Rosita climbs into the wheel of her car, pulling out the gun she took from Neil in the woods. At home, Rick spreads a blanket on the bedroom floor, mentioning that the rescuers took most of their mattresses. Michonne assures Rick that she no longer has a secret weapon. She reminds him that they survived because they always fought back, but Rick says there are too many saviors, it's the number. Michonne mentions the hilltop, but Rick says that even with the hilltop, they are still in the minority. He talks about his thoughts about the fact that Judith is not his biological daughter, and says that he learned to accept this in order to save her life. He tells Michonne that she has to learn to accept their situation with Negan, they all have to, otherwise nothing will work out. That's how we live now, he says. Michonne says she will try to accept it. She returns to the rusty truck in the grassy field. She sees clouds of smoke in the distance and goes in search. She discovers that all the mattresses from Alexandria are glued to the side of the road and are raging with anger. In Alexandria, Rosita picks up an empty cartridge case from the gun that Negan fired earlier that day and pays a visit to Eugene. "Make me a cartridge."